G'day guys, welcome back to the workshop. Today we're doing a viewer requested how to forge. This was requested by Wiley from my Patreon. It's forging an integral from round stock, and we're going to maintain that round cross-section in the bolster. This is a piece of 16mm round 01 tool steel. Otherwise, I believe it is 5/8. Could be wrong, but we're going to start by pointing the bar. My forge is a little bit cold to begin with, so we're going to take a lot of hefty blows, and we're still going to get a little fish mouthing. It helps to forge in the taper at the point where you've still got round stock, because it's easier to forge a square point than it is a flat tapered point, especially one that's asymmetrical. So, okay, take a couple of heats. And at the last heat I realized that fish mouthing is going to be too bad, and I'm actually going to use the edge of the anvil to clip off that rolled over section so that I get a nice sharp point. And I'm going to do that by just using half on half off blows at the very tip there, rolling 90 degrees every blow or two. And that's the standard practice for when you're doing a tapered point, is to either roll 90 degrees in the same direction all the time, or to roll 180 degrees and do opposing sides. And then once it's thin enough, you can literally just give it a tap and it'll pop off. And there you go, nice sharp point. The next step I'm going to show after this is using the horn and a round-faced hammer, or a straight peen hammer, to cut in the bolster set down to delineate the blade from the bolster material. You can also use the edge of the anvil, which I'll show you in a minute, but this is a way to create nice curving transition lines between the blade and the bolster. Now, it's necessary that you have a rounded faced hammer and that you flip 180 degrees and work from both sides evenly, because a lot of the time the hammer is going to be slightly less radius than the horn itself. And depending on how much of a radius you want will depend on where on the horn you work. I wanted a relatively large radius, so I was working quite close to the anvil here. But basically, once we've started delineating that blade from the bolster material, we can move on to the anvil and start using that as our guide to start drawing out the blade material. Now, in this specific build, I'm not looking for any drop from the too much drop from the blade, because that's fairly difficult to do when you're trying to maintain that round cross-section in the bolster. So instead, what I'm going to do is draw out a straight-sided parallel piece of even thickness to the bolster material, or to the original stock. So it's going to be parallel to the stock all the way down, and just step in and then distally taper down to the point. And then from there, we will get a little bit of drop from the edge when we start forging in the bevels. But this 01 is some really tough stuff under the hammer, so took a couple of heats to get it drawn out. So now that I've drawn out to the thickness that we'd originally drawn, I'm going to start drawing down the thickness of the bolster again, and I'm always going to work that bolster transition and then draw out the blade, because the bolster transition is going to tell me how thick the overall blade is going to be at its thickest point. And I don't want it to be thinner than the rest of the material, so you don't want to draw the taper and then cut the bolsters in, because you'll almost always end up with a thin section right at that bolster transition. So we're going to cut in the bolsters and then draw out the rest from there, and that way we can maintain that distal taper from the bolster to the point. And again, dressing the height of the billet if we need to make sure that it's parallel with the original stock. So you'll notice here, as I'm drawing out the blade, I'm constantly using a peen, in this case a straight peen, but you could use a cross peen or diagonal peen hammer. But this just means that I have to do less dressing of the height of the blade to ensure that I don't end up accidentally marring the round profile of that bolster while I'm forging. I want to keep that off the anvil at all times, so the less work I have to do vertically, the better. And that's for all of these steps. So when I'm drawing out over the horn or over the flat of the anvil, I want to be using a peen of some kind. You can see here just dressing the height a little bit, but I'm being very careful not to touch the area where the bolster is, because I'm going to potentially dent that and cause permanent marring to the surface. And here you can see our beautiful preform, nice and clean lines. We want to true everything up at this stage. We want to have all of our thicknesses perfect. The spine thickness along that curved top edge is going to have to be what we want the final thickness to be, because any thickness that we work on when we start the bevels is actually going to widen the top of the blade past the top of the bolster, and that's going to cause problems when we finally come to finish up. So you'll see I'm constantly flipping back and forth here, just dressing everything out, getting that nice distal taper going from thick to thin, and dressing that point down to make sure that it's a nice smooth flowing point rather than having those jagged hammer marks in it. I had the camera misplaced for this shot, but I'm going back and just dressing the bolster transition area, and then I'll draw out a little bit more. The reason for that was because I accidentally put the bolster transition onto the sharp edge of the anvil, and because I had a radius transition, the sharp edge of the anvil actually cut into that bolster transition a little bit. And so I just got to go back and dress that out, and this is why it pays to leave a little bit of extra thickness to your blades, so that you can grind it out later, or you can come back and forge it thinner if you need to. Transitioning here to a flat-faced hammer, my English cutler's hammer. This is just to dress out any of the more aggressive marks from the rounder-faced straight peen, and so that I've got a nice clean canvas to start working from. So now we're into the beveling, and we're actually using a cross-peen hammer because we want to draw quite a bit of width to get that little bit of drop from the edge, to give us a nice delineation between the bolster material and the blade material. And we want to, of course, focus on that heel section first, like we do on all of our builds that have a plunge cut or a delineation between a ricasso and the blade, or in this case, the bolster and the blade. But I'm not trying to create a sharp transition. I'm not trying to create a plunge cut in this case. I'm actually trying to use the radius edge of my anvil to blend that drop into the radius of the bolster. And I had varied success with this. But because this is going to be a kitchen knife, I want a little bit of height to the blade, because the more height you get, then you can get some finer geometry. And of course we're going to do all the roughing with the cross peen, but then we're going to end up going back in with a flat face hammer to dress those out. So we don't want to forge to final thickness with the cross peen. like I said, we're just moving down the blade, making our bevel, working from 2/3 the way up the blade down to the edge, the same way we would with any other blade, except in this case we're using a cross peen. And we always want to work from thick to thin, rather than working from thin to thick, pinching that material out. And that's going to give us our height. You'll notice that the blade doesn't banana as much when using the cross peen, and that's because you're drawing the material sideways rather than pushing it in 4 directions. And so most of the material not moving towards the tip means that it's not trying to push that tip backwards. So that's something to remember if you're ever making a blade that you want to keep relatively straight and wide, is that a cross peen will help you do that. But once we've established that area and we've established the height that we're gonna get, or if we want more, unfortunately we're not going to get it, but as long as we've got enough height, we're going to come back in and dress out all of those cross peen marks and get our final thickness. Now I forged this to about a 1/16 of an inch at the edge. It's about a 1.5 millimeters, 2 millimeters at the edge. So this will be heat treated straight after the forging. And we're going to go all the way down, redress the bevels, and we're going to come back and actually redress the profile as well, while it's still thick enough to withstand the blows without folding over. And because we want a nice clean forged finish, because it makes it easier when it comes to the grinder. You'll notice here that I'm tapping quite lightly, but I'm still moving material. You want to make sure that you're actually getting the desired result that you want. If you're not forging hard enough on the edge to deform the spine, and you want to deform the spine a little bit, you can flip it up, put the edge on the anvil, and hammer the spine with the hammer, and that way you'll actually get a little bit more deformation at the spine. But always make sure to dress your thicknesses, because it will mushroom and upset into itself. And then to just dress that heel section, I'm going to use the round horn to dress that out, and I'm going to roll the blade material back and forth in order to not damage that round cross-section of the bolster like we've been trying to, keep for the entire forging process, and it would be pointless and senseless to lose it now. So, yep, just going to roll it back and forth, keep it moving, and we're going to get a nice, clean, rounded off transition into that heel. And I was actually quite pleased with the blade profile on this knife. Doing a little bit of wet forging here at a lower temperature, just dressing everything. We're going to try and clean the surfaces off, make them as neat and tidy as possible. And obviously wet forging allows us to blow the scale off. The steam that is created from the hot metal being compressed against the anvil face with the water between it removes that scale, super cools the scale, and then blows it away, and then fractures it off. So yeah, makes it for a much cleaner forging. Now we're just going to hot cut it off. We're going to go in a circle, and we're well back from the bolster. It's better to have too much material in this case than not enough. We don't want to go anywhere near the bolster when we're cutting, because the hammer blows and the hot cut could potentially mar that area in a way that's impossible to fix. So yeah, we want to cut off more than enough material for the tang. And we can always cut off material from the tang later if we need to. So I decided that I was going to show you how to cut in Tang shoulders with just a hammer and anvil. If you had a guillotine tool, this would be the perfect time to use. But if you didn't have one, you just angle the piece to the anvil face, getting that really nice sharp transition on the corner of the anvil, and then use the corner of your hammer to mirror that edge of the anvil and cut in a shoulder. And you do 180 degree turns, and then you go 90 degrees to that, and then do 180 degree turns to create 4 shoulders. And we're going to create a square tang. That's going to be the best and easiest way to make a tang for this blade. Doesn't matter if the blade bends and stuff like that while we're doing this, we can always straighten that out later. But we want to be really careful with our hammer blows to get nice, sharp shoulders. And once we've got the shoulders established, we can start working the material down, and then we can just repeat the process. So once this material is down to the same thickness as the shoulders, we can then deepen the shoulders, come back, thin the tang material down, and then deepen the shoulders, and etc, etc, until we've got our tang cross-section that we want. In order to save time, because I was running out of daylight for this build, I ended up using the press. As I said, you can do this all with a hammer. If you had a guillotine tool, it would make this a million times easier, but obviously having the press is a significant advantage, and I can use this to quickly move that tang material down to its desired thickness. Now I went for about an 11mm cross-section, almost half an inch cross-section tang. And I prefer square tangs on my hidden tang integrals, because you almost never get them aligned with the blade when you do your forging. They'll always be canted or corkscrewed to the blade, and having the square cross-section means that you've got enough meat to then grind the sides flat, or the sides of the tang flat, to be parallel with the blade itself. And then once we've done the tang, we just flip it around, and we're going to do all of our straightening. This build, I ended up not doing all of the straightening I needed to, because as I said, I was running out of time. But I will take it back and do a little bit more straightening. The tang needs to be knocked over a little bit. But that being said, that is how I forge a hidden tang integral bolstered chef's knife. So here's just a quick flyby of the blade. You can see our nice transition into the blade there, nice curved transition, nice even edge thickness. You can see there how the tang's canted off to the side. That's something I can fix pretty quickly with a torch. But yeah, thanks for watching. There you have it, guys. How to forge an integral from round stock. Now obviously this is forging an integral where you're wanting to maintain the original shape of the stock that it came from. And I may do how to forge an integral where you're forging it from different square stock, and you can actually change the shape of bolster, which is a little bit easier than doing it this style. But I was asked specifically to do integrals from round stock by one of my patrons, Wiley. So hopefully this helped you out, Wiley. Now the reason I left the tang so chunky is because almost never will you get the tang oriented in the twist form with the blade. So leaving it nice and chunky means that I can orient this with the blade and grind it to be style of knife, but as I said, we may do another style in the future. If you want to see me forge any kind of blade that you may have seen forged before, or maybe one that you've never seen me forge before, but want to get my take on how to do it, then let me know in the comments down below. If you want to really be heard, then obviously you can go head on over to my Patreon page. My patrons get access to behind the scenes stuff. They get access to the videos 24 hours before they're uploaded, plus some free education, not free, but Patreon educational content just for their eyes only. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, head on over to Patreon and join this group of wonderful people, including Wiley, who asked me to make this lathe. So that being said, I'm going to hop off. You have a fantastic day. Get out to your workshop and make something.